You ever see a business story pop up and it feels like there's way more beneath the surface.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, that's how I felt about Dongwon Industries moving to take full ownership of Dongwon F&B. Seemed simple, right?
On the surface, maybe.
But almost instantly, the fur started flying. So today, for you, we're going to zero in on what this all really means.
Absolutely. We've looked at the sources on this, and they really dig into the acquisition and pretty significant concerns being raised, especially when you look at the role and, well, the history of Chairman Kim Nam-jung. Our goal here is basically to give you a clear, concise understanding of the core issues.
Okay, so let's break down the nuts and bolts first. What exactly is Dongwon Industries trying to do here?
Okay, so Dongwon Industries, which already has a big stake, like 74.4% in Dongwon F&B.
Right, a majority.
Exactly. They want to acquire all the remaining shares, bring Dongwon F&B totally under its umbrella.
How?
The method they're proposing is a full stock swap.
Okay, a swap.
So for every single share you hold in Dongwon F&B, you'd get 0.9150232 shares of Dongwon Industries stock.
Precise number.
Very. And the current timeline points to delisting Dongwon F&B entirely by July 31st of next year, 2025.
Right. Okay, so on the face of it, a pretty standard kind of takeover. What's causing all the friction then?
Well, the real sticking point, and where you're hearing the loudest objections from minority shareholders, is the price. Specifically, the price Dongwon Industries is proposing to buy back shares from those who don't want to do the stock swap.
Ah, the dissenting shareholders. What's the offer?
They're suggesting $35,024 per share for Dongwon Industries stock and $32,131 per share for Dongwon F&B for those choosing to sell out.
And that buyback price for F&B, darn you with $32,131 other. And that's the heart of the issue. Why is that such a problem?
Exactly. Because when this whole plan was announced, Dongwon F&B's shares were already trading higher, around 34,000.
Okay, so already below market at announcement.
Yes. But what's really key, and what the shareholders are pointing to, is that historically, the stock has traded much, much higher.
Like how high?
We're talking in the range of 40,000 to even around 60,000 per share at points.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I can see the problem. That's a big difference.
A huge difference. So minority shareholders, they feel this proposed buyback price just, well, significantly undervalues their investment.
Feels like they're being pushed out cheap.
That's the perception, definitely.
Yeah.
That it's a violation of their rights, essentially.
Now, you mentioned earlier this feels familiar. Like we've seen something like this before from Dongwon.
Yes, and that's what's fascinating and, frankly, quite concerning for a lot of observers. There's a very strong parallel, almost a déjà vu, to the 2022 merger between Dongwon Industries and Dongwon Enterprises.
Okay, refresh my memory on that one. What was the issue there?
That deal drew a lot of criticism because Dongwon Enterprises, which was a private company controlled by the chairman's family.
We're kind of holding company.
Exactly. It was widely perceived as being, well, overvalued in the merger deal.
While the public companies.
While Dongwon Industries, the publicly traded one with all the minority shareholders, was seen as undervalued.
Okay, so how does that past deal connect to what's happening now? Help connect the dots.
Well, think about the outcome. Following that 2022 merger, Chairman Kim Nam-jung emerged as the largest single shareholder of the newly combined Dongwon Industries.
Right. Consolidated his control.
Precisely. And then there were subsequent share buybacks and cancellations that further boosted the ownership stake of related parties, the family essentially, to over 86%.
Over 86%. Okay.
So now with this move to fully acquire Dongwon F&B, there's this strong sense of, here we go again.
Deja vu.
Exactly. Critics are bringing up that term again. Equity magic.
Equity magic. Sounds a bit like financial sleight of hand. What does it mean in this context?
It's basically a term used to describe how these corporate structures, mergers, acquisitions can be sort of manipulated. They might look beneficial on the surface, maybe simpler governance or something. But ultimately, they serve to consolidate control or, transfer wealth in a way that disadvantages those minority shareholders. Often involves arguments about unfair valuation or exchange ratios.
Right, like the valuation arguments in 2022 and now the buyback price for F&B?
Precisely. It fits the pattern, according to these critics.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's look at both sides. Dongwon Industries is saying this current move is about boosting their strategic position, right?
Yes, their official line, yes.
Things like expanding global reach, streamlining research.
That's the stated rationale. They argue that having Dongwon F&B as a wholly owned subsidiary will give them greater strategic flexibility.
Okay.
Help them expand global sales, make R&D more efficient and integrated, synergy arguments.
Standard merger talk. But the people pushing back, the minority shareholders and critics, they see a different motive, don't they? What are their main concerns beyond just the price?
Well, the primary concerns really center around the potential for less transparency.
Because F&B would be delisted.
Exactly. And a weakening of external oversight once it's off the stock exchange. Being public means you have certain reporting rules, scrutiny from the market, from investors.
Accountability.
Accountability. Delisting removes or at least reduces that layer. And furthermore, the way the stock swap ratio and that buyback price are structured, it leads many to believe this isn't just about simplifying things.
What then?
They suspect it's more of a move towards, well, what some are calling corporate privatization.
Privatization, meaning taking it private for the benefit of the family.
That's the accusation.
Yeah.
That it unfairly benefits the controlling family at the expense of the minority investors. And, there are even warnings floating around from market analysts that this kind of tactic might pop up again with other publicly listed companies within the Dongwon Group down the line.
Right. Setting a precedent, potentially. And this isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? There was that whole Starkist situation hanging over them, too.
Yeah, that certainly adds another, let's say, layer to the governance concerns surrounding the Dongwon Group.
Remind us about that.
Well, you'll probably recall that Dongwon's U.S. subsidiary, Starkist,
The tuna brand, right.
the big tuna brand, they faced pretty significant legal trouble. Ended up being fined a substantial amount, $100 million in the U.S.
For
its role in tuna price fixing. Cartel behavior, basically.
Okay, big fine. So what's the governance angle?
What really raised eyebrows from a governance perspective, and shareholder perspective too, I imagine, is that reports indicate the parent company, Dongwon Industries itself, paid that massive penalty.
Not Starkist, the subsidiary that did the price fixing.
Apparently not Starkist, but the parent company, which, has its own set of shareholders who might wonder why their company is footing the bill for the subsidiary's wrongdoing.
Right. So you've got minority shareholders feeling squeezed on the F&B deal.
Yes.
A past merger that looks similar and tightened the chairman's control. And this major fine for a subsidiary being paid by the parent. It definitely paints a complex picture.
It certainly does. And what's particularly noteworthy, I think, is how these different elements seem to be converging. They're raising these broader questions about, the direction of corporate governance within the whole Dongwon Group.
And specifically about Chairman Kim Nam-jung's management approach.
Exactly. His strategy and how it impacts all stakeholders, not just the controlling family.
Yeah, this has been a really clear breakdown, actually. It really brings the different pieces together. It definitely feels like there are some significant implications here.
I think so.
Particularly around how companies balance those big strategic goals with the fundamental rights of their shareholders.
Absolutely. And if you step back and look at the bigger picture, this situation really shines a light on those ongoing tensions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The debates around corporate control, shareholder value, the responsibilities of leadership, especially in publicly traded companies.
So for everyone listening, just to quickly recap the crucial points, Dongwon Industries' plan to fully acquire Dongwon F&B, it's facing some serious opposition.
Very strong opposition,
From minority shareholders. Their main issue is that buyback price. They feel it massively undervalues their shares.
And the whole structure feels very similar to that controversial 2022 merger, which really cemented the chairman's control.
Right, and then you throw in that huge $100 million fine paid by Dongwon Industries for Starkist's price fixing.
It just adds fuel to the fire regarding governance questions around the entire Dongwon Group.
Definitely.
This all raises a really interesting question for people to think about.
Go on.
Considering all these concerns we've discussed, shareholder rights, corporate control in this specific Dongwon case, what are the wider implications for corporate governance in general? When you see similar mergers and acquisitions, and maybe more practically, how can minority shareholders actually safeguard their investments better?
How can they make sure their voices are heard?
Yes, exactly. When these big corporate decisions are being made, seemingly over their heads sometimes, it really makes you consider that delicate balance, between the company's strategic moves and the fundamental rights of the individual investors.